The world was ending, not with a news bulletin, but with a 4-day countdown. My sister and I had one chance, a secret bunker built by our paranoid, late father. Our escape was a desperate, cross-country sprint through a collapsing society, complicated by betrayal, armed gangs, and the arrival of Lieutenant Thorne Charles, the lethal soldier I wasn't supposed to fall for. We were racing the clock, fighting for survival, and finding reckless love just as the sky began to burn. The end was messy, but the fight to survive would be even worse. Chapter 1. The metallic tang of late afternoon rain hung heavy in the air as I finally kicked off my soggy canvas sneakers inside the front door. I dragged myself across the worn parquet floor, the deep, oppressive silence of the house pressing down on me like a physical weight. It had been another day of pointless, soul. Chapter 1. The metallic tang of late afternoon rain hung heavy in the air as I finally kicked off my soggy canvas sneakers inside the front door. I dragged myself across the worn parquet floor, the deep, oppressive silence of the house pressing down on me like a physical weight. It had been another day of pointless, soul-sucking interviews, each one ending with the same lukewarm smile and an empty, scripted promise. My college diploma felt less like a treasured key, and more like a pricey, utterly useless receipt. A sharp, jarring buzz from the kitchen counter made me jump. It was a text from Clara. "Micah, we need to talk about the bunker." I felt a cold, hard knot tighten in my stomach. It had been exactly 3 months since Dad's funeral, and Clara hadn't wasted a minute trying to liquidate his entire legacy. The house was one thing, a painful but practical necessity, but the bunker was another. It was Dad's monstrous, concrete testament to his paranoia, his self-funded insurance policy against a world he never trusted. He had bought the remote patch of desolate Colorado land and sunk every spare penny into that subterranean stronghold. The irony was a bitter pill I couldn't swallow. His doomsday didn't come in the form of fire or ice, but quietly, insidiously, with stage 4 cancer. I glanced at the mountain of empty moving boxes stacked in the hallway. They were waiting to be loaded with a lifetime of memories, decades of accumulated possessions reduced to disposable cargo. I didn't mind selling the house. I desperately needed the money. We both did, actually, but the bunker felt sacredly different. It was the physical embodiment of his greatest passion project, and letting it go felt like deleting him from history. Okay, I texted back, the single word a quiet surrender, and tossed my phone onto the chipped granite countertop. I knew the proceeds from the house alone would net us at least $200,000 each after all the legal fees. That amount was a lifeline for both of us, enough to decapitate the student debt that was choking my future. I walked into the kitchen, the vast, empty space amplifying the hollowness in my chest. I put a pot of water on for pasta and decided to tackle the living room first, attacking the built-in bookshelves with grim efficiency. Several hours and 3 overflowing trash bags later, I heard the key turn in the lock, followed by the familiar, brisk cadence of footsteps. "Micah? In here," I called out, pulling a dusty dictionary off a high shelf. Clara appeared in the doorway, neatly framed by the evening light. She was impeccably dressed in the kind of crisp, tailored blazer that always made me feel like a perpetual graduate student. Clara's eyes immediately scanned the room, cataloging the progress with a quick, professional assessment. "Great," Clara said, her voice already sounding efficient. She picked up a stray rubber band from the floor and tucked it into her pocket. "The sooner you finish, the sooner we can get a contractor in to fix the leaky gutter and get Tori to list it." "Yeah," I mumbled, handing my sister an empty box label so she could help. The silence that descended was thick and uncomfortable. We hadn't been close for years. "So," I ventured, trying to puncture the tension, "what are you going to do with your share?" Clara bit down on her lower lip. "A tell. We are going to try and start fertility treatments." Clara and Michael had been married for 5 years, and they'd been trying for a child since their wedding night, unsuccessfully. "That's why I want to talk to you about the bunker. Michael found someone who could pay $1 million for it." I raised my eyebrows. "That much?" She nodded. "Yeah. Super rich guy, who is into the whole survivalist prepper lifestyle." I shook my head. "I don't know, Clara. It just feels too soon." "Soon? We are selling the house, aren't we? And besides, you, out of everyone, never really cared for the whole prepper lifestyle." She tried to convince me with a persuasive tilt of her head. "That's different," I said in a small voice. "How?" Clara insisted. She had always been the pushy one. "I don't know. It just is." Clara gathered a lot of the bags that were marked for recycling. "Look, I'm going to leave you for a while so that you can think about it. This is a great opportunity that I don't think we should miss," she said, leaving with the bags. I sighed heavily when I heard her close the door behind her. The following day, I finished the living room and decided to move into the study. This was Dad's favorite place, the nerve center, where he planned and did his research. A wall-to-wall bookshelf was lined with survival gear. A wind-up radio and his heavy laptop sat closed on the dark mahogany desk. It looked as if it was merely waiting for its owner to come and open it. I wiped a tear from my eye and ran a finger on the dusty desktop. I wished Clara was here, perhaps to offer a moment of quiet solidarity. I decided to sit down on his comfortable leather chair, a spot I had loved as a kid, and slowly opened the computer. The screen stared back at me, blank, until I switched it on. After it powered up, I saw some notifications pouring in from a browser icon, and I clicked it open. It was a site called Prepper Now. An active discussion was happening, and my eyes landed on the words, trying to follow the conversation. They were going crazy over an asteroid heading to Earth. They were saying it was now clearly visible through a telescope, and were surprised the government hadn't said anything. An uneasy chill crept up my spine. Usually, these people just offered mere speculation of what could happen, but right now, they were talking with a horrifying definiteness. I stared at Dad's large, intricate telescope and felt my phone vibrate. It was Clara again. Asterisk. The guy has raised the price to $3 million. We can't let this opportunity go, Micah. Michael and I will stop over after work. I just need you to sign a few pieces of paperwork, and this deal will go through. My brow wrinkled in confusion. I texted her back. It's been less than 24 hours. I told her so, but she didn't reply. I turned my attention to the screen once more and typed, "How can I see the meteor?" A reply came from one of the moderators, Chuck. He sent me a private message. Asterisk Gavin? One of your girls told me you died. My reply was quick. This is Micah, his daughter. Oh, how you doing, kiddo? Asterisk, he replied. I rolled my eyes. I was 24 years old, but I guess to someone my dad's age, I was just a kid. I'm all right. Are you guys being for real with this whole meteor business? He replied. Asterisk. Yep, in 2 weeks. You better get your ass to Colorado to your dad's bunker. It's going to be a bad one. Civilization-ending type of bad. He then sent me the direction I should look in the night sky for the meteor and a PDF he insisted I download. When I opened it, it was some safety precautions, detailing what I should and should not do. I printed it out and started reading through it, passing the time, not wanting to tackle the packing of the study. After lunch, I finally managed to gather enough energy to start packing up. I had finished reading the manual Chuck sent me from cover to cover. His instructions were clear and chillingly precise. My mind had been completely taken with his words. I was constantly checking the window for nightfall. He really had gotten into my head with this. I knew I would laugh at myself when I peered through that telescope tonight and found nothing. When the sun finally set, the study was about done being packed. I adjusted the telescope to where he told me to look, and I saw nothing at first, adjusting it some more until I saw something. I didn't understand what it was, but I knew for sure it was not a star. I stepped back and swallowed hard. What the actual fuck? I looked through it again, and sure as rain, it was there. I pulled up Dad's computer and typed a search for any news on a meteor heading for Earth, and found nothing. The only people talking about it were prepper sites. I opened Prepper Now and typed in the message bar, "Why isn't the government warning us or even reporting about this?" Several replies came, and none of them made sense. I scrolled up the message, and some of the people in the forum had shared an image of the meteor, and it looked exactly like what I had seen. One reply caught my attention. You can't even post the word meteor on social media. The post won't go through. I pressed my lips together in disbelief and opened my social app and typed, "Has anyone seen the meteor that's about to hit us?" I pressed send. The post failed to go through. I tried it on 5 other apps, and it failed every time. Dread, cold and heavy, settled in me. I headed back to Prepper Now and typed, "How sure are you that it will hit us?" Chuck replied with a diagram and calculations showing the rock was heading straight for us. I pulled back from the computer, starting to hyperventilate, and was relieved when I heard the front door open with footsteps coming. I rushed out of the study and headed for Clara, hugging her tight. After a moment, I pulled back, but she had a worried expression on her face. "What's wrong?" she asked. I told her to follow me, and she and Michael came into the study. I was going through Dad's forum online. They are saying there is a meteor that's heading straight for us. Clara and Michael looked at each other, then at me. It was Clara who began. "Honey, calm down. It's just a bunch of crazies online," she said as she switched off the computer and looked at me with worry. "Maybe it was a bad idea letting you handle the packing. Why don't you come and stay with us until the sale of the house is done? We will hire someone to pack all this up." "Clara, they are not lying this time. Just look through the telescope and you'll see it." She sighed loudly the way she did as a teenager when I would follow her around, then walked over to the telescope and peered through it. She was silent for a while, then turned to me. Michael looked through it as well. "It could be anything," he said. "What? That's clearly a fucking rock floating through space." Michael was pressing his phone. "There is nothing on the news. There must be 1,000 rocks floating in space. This is just one of them, and is harmless like the rest. Are you kidding me right now?" I looked at the both of them, incredulous. Clara removed some papers from the envelope and turned to me, her smile bright. "Look, the guy has raised the price to $30 million for the bunker, but he said that's his last price. I really think we should take it. This money will set the both of us up for a really long time. My eyes went wide. That more than anything had solidified the meteor coming as the truth. Seriously? In the space of a day, this guy has raised his bid from $1 million to $30 million, and you still think those preppers online are not telling the truth? Just sign the papers, Micah. It's best for the both of you, Michael said. I turned to him, eyes blazing. You don't get a say in this. Then I turned to Clara, pleading. Please, I beg you. Let's just hold off for 2 weeks. He can wait that long, can't he? When the time lapses, I'll gladly sign the papers. Hell, I'll let you have 70% of the money. Clara looked at me and bit her jaw. Michael looked between us, then at his wife. Oh, you can't be serious. That's a lot of money we are leaving on the table. There is no guarantee that he'll be interested in 2 weeks. Maybe he also believes the meteor stuff. That's why he is willing to shell out that amount. He won't be so generous in 2 weeks. She shrugged. Clara had always been the one who paid attention to Dad the most. She was really into this until she turned 16, and other things held her attention. It's just 2 weeks. What does he have to lose? She told him. Michael threw up his hands in frustration and walked out of the study. Clara's eyes were hard on me. 2 weeks, then you sign those papers. Not an hour or a day late, she said, walking out of the house and leaving me alone. I released a breath of relief and sank into the chair. Chapter 2, The Egress. I spent the next few days finishing up the house. When I was done, the only thing remaining was an empty kitchen, and I was sitting on the cold, tiled floor, eating scalding hot ramen and opening the laptop when the front door banged open. Micah, Clara shouted, her voice raw and frantic. I looked up and yelled, Kitchen! She ran into the room, skidding slightly on the floor. Her usually neat hair was shoved into a messy, collapsing bun, and her feet were bare. I scrambled to stand up, worried. What's going on? Did something happen to Michael? She looked around the empty house, her eyes large and unfocused. Have you seen the news? I shook my head, my attention still on the computer screen. You were right. It's coming. I've been trying to call you. I glanced at my phone. It had gone off earlier and was hooked to the charger on the counter, its screen dark. What do you mean? I swallowed hard, the ramen suddenly leaden in my stomach, knowing exactly what she meant. The asteroid. It was really truly coming. The government has been sending alerts all day, she gasped, trying to catch her breath. They are cautioning for calm. I opened the forum, the noodles forgotten. The messages there were frantically swirling, the conversation impossible to follow. I quickly searched for an online news channel, and the words breaking news flashed in bold letters. Below that, in bold red, was a single, terrifying question. Is this the end? My phone rang. It was Chuck. I hope you're ready to move out ASAP, he said the moment I answered. Chuck was all the way in Alaska, and had been in his bunker for a week now. No, not yet, I said. Clara was now nervously chewing the acrylic off her perfectly manicured fingernails. I thought about all the things the manual said I was supposed to gather. I opened the folder with the printed document he'd sent me. You should be heading out now, while people are still confused, he advised me. Clara snatched the papers from me, skimming through the bullet points. I will. We just need to gather a few things, I told him. Do it quick. It's gonna be a long drive, he warned. Drive? I exclaimed. Yes, drive. All planes are grounded, he said, then added. My nephew Thorne is also in Indiana. He was supposed to come to me this morning, but everything is grounded. Is it okay if he comes to bunk with you when the meteor hits? Don't worry, he is going to be a valuable resource. A tough-as-nails motherfucker. Of course, I answered immediately. I had put the phone on speaker, and Clara's eyes widened in alarm. There was a knock at the door, which she went to answer. I'll send you the frequency you can get us on. Do you have your dad's go bag out? He asked. I do, I confirmed. Good. There is a high-frequency radio in there that you should use. If you have any problems operating it, Thorne will be able to help you. All right, I have to get on with the prep, I said, and then Chuck hung up. Clara walked back in, followed by 3 men, all military types in fatigues. This is Lieutenant Thorne Charles, she introduced him, along with the 2 other men, Kyle Richards and Daniel Lopez. I just spoke to your uncle, I told Thorne by way of greeting. He nodded to me, his sharp blue eyes standing out against his closely shaved hair. Ma'am, thank you for letting us tag along. I nodded and looked at Clara, whose eyes were wide open, trying to communicate silently with me. We expected 1 guy, not 3. Don't mention it. We need to gather a few supplies before we head out, I said. What can we do? Thorne asked, his voice low and serious. I turned to Clara, relieved that she already looked like she had a plan in her eyes. We need to pick up food for the bunker and other supplies. We need to get everything on the list. Max out your cards if you can, she said, immediately taking charge. The 3 men looked at the list. How about you 2 handle the food, and we can take care of everything else? Thorne suggested. That sounds good. Micah, can we use Dad's truck? She asked me, and I nodded. As we were heading out, I asked Clara, "Where is Michael?" She flinched. I noticed that this was the first time she had thought of him. She pulled out her phone, and a grimace took over her lips. There were 4 missed calls from him. After quickly texting him our plans, we stepped out and found a large, gray truck parked outside. Inside, I spotted a woman and a small boy. "Who is that?" Clara asked first, her voice tight. Lopez bit his lower lip. "My wife and son." "Are you kidding me right now?" I blurted out. "You two were just sprung on us, and now you spring 2 more people?" Clara added, her frustration mounting. "Will there be any more surprises?" I looked pointedly at the 3 men. The woman, realizing she was the topic of discussion, came out of the truck and waved with a small, tight smile. "She is just a tiny woman and a boy. They won't take up much space. And besides, she's valuable. Maya is an ER nurse." Maya walked up to us. "Maya Lopez," she introduced herself. "I know this is an imposition, but I swear we won't be a burden." I looked at Clara. It was harder to deny someone when they were standing right in front of you. "I guess you'll be on food gathering duty," I said to Maya, and looked to Clara for support. She shrugged, her eyes caught on a car speeding down the road. Some neighbors were outside, staring up at the blue sky, hoping to catch a glimpse of the meteor. Chuck said we would only be able to see it clearly during the day starting tomorrow. "We have to move out before people realize they need to gather supplies as well," Thorne warned. "Is that your truck?" I nodded. "I'll drive if you don't mind." "I think it will become dangerous soon." Just then, I recognized the car that pulled up behind Thorne's. It was Michael's. He parked it right on the lawn and walked toward Clara. "What the fuck is going on?" he said, his eyes bright with panic. "It seems Micah was right," Clara replied dryly. "Shit," he exclaimed, and nodded curtly toward me. There was no love lost between us. "Who are these people, and where are you heading?" he asked. A woman emerged from his car. It was Tori, the house agent. "We are going to gather supplies and head to the bunker." "Tori?" Clara asked, spotting her. The gorgeous blonde came closer. Clara threw accusing eyes at Michael. "Why are you two together?" Michael looked at Tori and faltered, then answered, "I met her along the way." Clara laughed in disbelief, a short, humorless sound. "We have to move out," Thorne said, taking the keys from me. "You are not planning on driving all the way to Colorado, are you?" Michael asked in utter disbelief. "Heck yes we are," I answered. He shook his head. "That's crazy. Haven't you seen the news? They say we must keep calm, and we will be directed toward safe bunkers. All of us will be taken to some bunker?" I asked him, genuinely not believing his naivete. "Are you two fucking?" Clara asked, looking at Michael and Tori directly, tears now brimming in her eyes. "Okay," Kyle said, signaling for Daniel and Maya to get into the car. The couple did so reluctantly, clearly wanting to watch the drama up close. "We should get in the car," Thorne started, and I cut him off. "I'm not going anywhere without my sister," I told him, as I stepped to stand beside her. Michael spluttered. How can you ask me that?" he said. "So that's a yes," Clara said, a single tear tracking a path through the dust on her cheek. "We didn't plan for it to happen," Tori said by way of explanation, looking miserable. Clara's face, already pale and tear-streaked, crumpled. She turned away from Michael, clutching her stomach as if struck. The shock of the betrayal was a physical blow. "You said you met her along the way," I repeated, my voice flat and cold, throwing Michael's lie back at him. "You couldn't even be honest with her when the world is ending?" Michael looked at the ground, ashamed. Then his gaze hardened with his usual self-justification. "It was a mistake. Look, Clara, this is insane. They're telling everyone to stay calm. The government is going to set up shelters. We need to stay here and wait for the official instructions. I'm not driving across the country based on some crazy forum your sister found." He gestured wildly at the group. "The soldiers, the nurse, the trucks. This is a suicide run, and I'm not letting you go." "Too late," Clara whispered, her eyes still fixed on the distance. "The deal's off, Michael. The bunker is mine. The house is yours. Take Tori and go wait for your government instructions." He stared at his wife, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Tori put a hesitant hand on his arm, and that was all the confirmation Clara needed. "Move," Thorne barked, already at the back of Dad's black pickup truck, cutting short the pathetic standoff. "We're wasting time." Michael watched us for a moment longer, a mixture of fear, disbelief, and relief warring on his face. He turned, got into his car, and drove away, his tires spitting up grass as Tori sat silently beside him, their departure a quiet, cowardly anticlimax. I grabbed Clara's arm. "Come on. We have to go. You can fall apart later." She nodded stiffly, the reality of the impending doom finally eclipsing her personal pain. "Food and fuel. We need to hit 3 places, now." We piled into Dad's black truck. Thorne took the wheel. I sat in the middle, clutching the list, and Clara sat by the window. Kyle, Daniel, Maya, and her young son Leo quickly climbed into the gray truck that Thorne had arrived in. The supply run, our first stop, a large 24-hour supermarket, was eerily calm. The parking lot had a scattering of cars, but inside, the aisles were largely empty. The fluorescent lights hummed with a false sense of normal life. Clara and I will take the dry goods and canned food. Maya, you focus on the medical supplies, I instructed, pulling the list out of my pocket. We started with methodical efficiency. Clara, a natural planner, tore through the canned goods aisle, her previous despair replaced by a feverish focus. I loaded the cart with rice, beans, flour, and bottled water, anything with a long shelf life. Maya moved with the assured swiftness of a professional in the pharmacy section. Meanwhile, Thorne sent his men on a separate mission. Kyle and Daniel, instead of just standing guard, split up. Kyle headed to the back, tossing heavy-duty work gloves, rolls of duct tape, and a collection of knives into a utility cart from the hardware section. Daniel moved to the seasonal aisle, emerging with several sleeping bags, thick tarping, and a couple of large, sealed 5-gallon water jugs. They were securing survival gear, not just groceries. In 20 minutes, we had 2 food carts overflowing, plus a third cart containing the non-food equipment. We're clear on the gear, Thorne muttered, checking his watch. Fuel next. As if on cue, a sudden wail of a siren cut through the quiet store, immediately followed by the blare of a news report on someone's phone. A voice, laced with barely contained panic, was shouting something about evacuation routes. The dam had broken. The handful of shoppers who had been calmly meandering through the aisles snapped. A woman near the cleaning supplies let out a guttural scream. A man near the milk aisle overturned a display and began stuffing cartons into his jacket. Within seconds, the front doors burst open, and a surging wave of people poured into the store. They weren't shopping. They were scavenging. They didn't have lists. They had desperation. A man slammed his shoulder into our full cart of canned goods, sending cans tumbling everywhere. "Get out of the way," he roared, snatching a case of tuna and shoving his way toward the checkouts. "Hold the line," Thorne yelled, his voice cutting through the rising tide of noise. He planted himself in front of our main carts. Kyle and Daniel immediately formed a human barricade around the 3 carts, their faces grim. "Clara, check out now," I shouted. We struggled to push the massive carts through the bottleneck forming at the registers. The sound of breaking glass and frantic shouting echoed off the high ceilings. People were climbing over shelves, reaching blindly for anything. Clara, her face pale, shoved her way to an open register. As the clerk frantically scanned the mountain of food, I looked back. Thorne and his men were pushing back the crowd, their focused resistance, the only thing protecting our haul. "Fuel is going to be hell," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Forget the store," Clara panted, throwing a stack of bills onto the counter. "We get what we have and we run, now." We abandoned the change and pushed the carts through the doors, out into the parking lot that was now a scene of utter pandemonium. Cars were screeching, horns blaring, and people were running toward the stores, their faces tight with fear. "Load up." "Fast," Thorne yelled, throwing open the tailgate of the black truck. We started hauling boxes, the sound of the developing riot inside the store spurring our speed. This wasn't a supply run anymore. This was a desperate escape. We had what we had. It would have to be enough. "Gas station, now." Thorne's voice was clipped, a sharp command that admitted no debate. We roared out of the supermarket parking lot, Dad's black truck fishtailing slightly as Thorne aggressively navigated the chaotic mess of fleeing cars and abandoned baskets. Kyle, in the gray truck, stuck close to our bumper, the smaller vehicle weaving through traffic. The panic in the streets had mutated from confusion to open hostility. People weren't just running. They were fighting over curb space, leaning on horns, and shouting accusations. When we pulled into the large gas station, it was already a scene of organized desperation. About a dozen cars were lined up haphazardly, drivers yelling at each other while simultaneously trying to swipe pumps. Thorne didn't hesitate. He drove Dad's truck directly past the line of cars, positioning it perfectly next to 2 empty pumps that had been temporarily blocked by cones. He was out of the door before the engine was fully silenced. "Stay in the truck. Lock the doors. Do not open them for anyone," he ordered, his blue eyes sweeping the area, calculating threats. Clara and I immediately hit the locks. Thorne pulled the nozzle and shoved it into the tank of the black truck. Simultaneously, Kyle and Daniel jumped out of the gray truck, both carrying multiple red jerry cans. "They loaded the gray truck before they met us," Clara whispered, her voice tight. They were prepared for this. As Thorne started fueling the truck, Kyle and Daniel quickly began filling the auxiliary fuel cans already placed around the gray truck. Their efficiency and coordination were unnerving. They moved with the practiced, focused economy of men who expected to be interrupted at any second. A beat-up sedan, furious at being cut, screeched up next to us. The driver, a large man with a flushed face, immediately pounded on the black truck's window. "Hey, we were waiting. That's our pump." "Keep fueling, Thorne," I muttered, my knuckles white as I gripped the armrest. Thorne ignored the driver completely, his attention laser-focused on the pump display. He was a wall of solid muscle, and controlled stillness in the chaos. The man started to walk around the hood of the truck toward Thorne. I said, "That's my foo." Before the man could finish the word, Thorne moved. It wasn't a fight, just a demonstration. He straightened up, his height and unmistakable military bearing suddenly overwhelming. He looked the driver directly in the eye, and the sheer cold intensity in Thorne's gaze stopped the man dead in his tracks. Thorne didn't say a word, but the message was clear. Walk away now, or this ends badly for you. The driver wavered, swore under his breath, and backed off, returning to his car defeated. It was in that moment, watching him command the space purely through presence, that I felt a dizzying shift. He was hard, dangerous, and completely focused on survival. He was the opposite of Michael's weak, self-serving panic. His shaved head, the tense muscles in his neck, the way his blue eyes constantly scanned and assessed, it was brutally attractive. For the first time since Dad died, I wasn't just thinking about surviving the end of the world. I was thinking about the man who was making it possible. A sharp, illicit bolt of awareness shot through me. "He's terrifying," Clara breathed, but there was a hint of unwilling respect in her voice. "Almost done," I murmured, trying to drag my attention back to the danger outside. The black truck's tank clicked full. Thorne moved with the hose to the fuel cans he'd placed on the ground next to the truck. That was when the real trouble hit. A woman, hysterical and crying, drove her minivan directly into a pump on the far side of the station. The impact sent a shockwave of panic through the already volatile crowd. People abandoned their cars and charged the remaining functioning pumps, turning the line into a savage scrum. "We've got 10 cans to go," Daniel yelled over the renewed chaos. "Too many eyes," Thorne shouted back. He yanked the nozzle out of the 4th can, throwing the cap on. "That's it. Now!" He sprinted around the back, throwing the half-full can into the bed of the black truck, and jumped behind the wheel. Kyle and Daniel were already piling into the gray truck. "Hold on," Thorne yelled. He slammed the truck into drive, peeling out and leaving the fuel cans on the ground behind us. The crowd was too busy ripping the pumps out of the ground to even notice our escape. We sped toward the highway, leaving the flaming red gas station and the screaming, doomed people behind us. The group has food, gear, and enough fuel. Drove with a furious, controlled precision, the tires of the black truck screaming protests as he merged onto the main thoroughfare. The traffic was no longer moving. It was congealing. A few minutes ago, it had been a panic. Now it was a terminal clog. Every lane was jammed solid with abandoned cars, drivers having simply walked away to run home, or worse, toward some phantom safety. "The interstate exit ramp is ahead," Thorne stated, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his eyes darting between the rearview mirrors and the road ahead. "If we can hit the highway, we can make time." But as we approached the main interchange, the horrifying extent of the government's response became clear. Flashing blue lights strobed violently against a wall of heavy military vehicles. Uniformed National Guard soldiers, weapons held ready, formed a steel barricade across the entire breadth of the interstate entrance. "The city's locked down," Daniel's voice crackled over the radio from the gray truck following behind us. Thorne swore, a low, guttural sound that vibrated through the truck's cabin. He slammed on the brakes, stopping just short of a pileup of civilian cars that had been halted by the military line. A soldier with a helmet obscuring his face and a loud hailer raised to his mouth was booming instructions. "Turn around! All citizens must return to their homes and await further instruction. I repeat, the city is under emergency lockdown. No vehicles are authorized to leave. They're trying to prevent mass exodus," Clara whispered, her face pale. "They want to keep everyone contained for their evacuation bunkers, which means they're keeping the public away from the real danger and ensuring the people who know where to go, like us, don't get out easily," Thorne corrected, his analysis stark and brutal. He wrenched the steering wheel hard, executing a tight, illegal U-turn over a traffic island, the black truck barely clearing the debris. We spent the next hour hitting every major artery leading out of the city. The result was identical. Concrete and steel barricades, heavily armed guards, and the ceaseless, infuriating refrain to stay home and stay calm. Every attempt was a failure, sending us deeper into the choked, terrified heart of the metropolis. As we finally started heading back toward Dad's neighborhood, the realization hit me. Clara was still moving on adrenaline, but she was in pain. Her feet, bare since she left her apartment, were now scraped and grimy from the city streets. "Clara, stop for a second," I said, reaching back and pulling the go bag I'd packed earlier from behind the seat. I rummaged through it until I found a pair of thin, soft black ballet flats. They were the only comfortable shoes I owned besides the sneakers I'd kicked off yesterday, and they were a size too big for me, but they'd fit her perfectly. "Your feet are bleeding," I noted, gently placing the shoes in her lap. "Put these on. I know they aren't hiking boots, but they're better than nothing." Clara looked down at the shoes, then at me, her rigid focus momentarily fractured. "Thank you, Micah." The words were quiet, stripped of her usual efficiency. It was the first truly human, unguarded moment we'd had since Dad died. We arrived back at the house just as the sun began to set, painting the sky in streaky, anxious oranges and purples. The familiar quiet of the empty house was now an illusion, merely the eye of a global storm. Strategy and static. The first order of business was information. Thorne tasked Kyle and Daniel with scouting the neighborhood perimeter and securing the house against potential opportunistic looters, while Maya immediately set about organizing the scant medical supplies. I led Thorne and Clara to the garage. It was dusty and cluttered with Dad's forgotten projects, but perched high on a shelf was an old, bulky cathode ray tube television, a relic from the pre-digital age. We dragged it into the living room, connecting it to a flimsy set of rabbit ear antennae. "We need to see what they're feeding the public now," Thorne said, folding his large frame onto the empty parquet floor. I hit the power button. The screen flickered to life with a blast of static, followed by the sight of a somber-faced news anchor sitting at a desk that looked far too official for the words coming out of his mouth. "The president has confirmed that a large near-Earth object, codenamed Nemesis, is being actively monitored. While the chance of a catastrophic impact remains statistically low, the government is implementing, quote, precautionary shelter and containment protocols to ensure orderly civic function. We urge all Americans to stay tuned to this channel for specific location instructions." Statistically low, Clara scoffed, pacing the empty room. $30 million for a bunker that no one but Dad knew about doesn't sound statistically low. "They're lying to prevent a total breakdown of society," Thorne confirmed, his blue eyes never leaving the screen. "They need time to get their own into their safe zones. If they announced the truth, people would tear the cities apart tonight." We spread out the large, slightly greasy map of the county I had grabbed from Dad's study and began to strategize. "Every major road is a bust," Thorne said, drawing bold, red X's across the interstate lines. "They can't guard every single mile of county road, though. Not with this level of panic. They're focusing on choke points. Dad wouldn't have built a bunker that required using a major interstate anyway," I mused, tracing the winding lines of smaller state routes. "He always talked about the unmaintained paths, gravel roads, fire breaks, old logging trails," Thorne translated, nodding once. "We need to find a way to bypass the guarded main roads and get the trucks onto something barely patrolled." The clock. 4 days to impact. Gavin's forum had been eerily precise. The 2-week window was now down to 96 hours. The news confirmed the object was visible during the day now, a small, dark smudge against the sun. Our discussion stretched late into the night, fueled by lukewarm instant coffee and the rising sense of dread. Maya, having finished organizing the medicine, sat quietly, listening to the conversation with the grim focus of a professional realizing the scale of the impending trauma. The logistics were daunting. We had 2 full trucks of people, food, and gear. We needed to navigate hundreds of miles of backroads, while avoiding military checkpoints and a panicked, weaponized population. Clara, despite the betrayal, was operating at peak efficiency, marking potential supply points and listing the specific tools we needed from the auto supply store. Now an even more critical stop. We need fuel cans, obviously, but also a spare tire kit, shovels, heavy rope, and chains for the tires. "If we hit the backroads, we will get stuck," she declared, tapping the map. The first kiss. Around 2 a.m., the others retired to the relative quiet of the bedrooms to catch a few hours of uneasy sleep. Clara, exhausted, simply slumped into an old armchair, the little black ballet flats a dark contrast to her bare, scraped legs. I found Thorne in the kitchen. He wasn't sleeping. He was sitting at the chipped granite counter, cleaning and reassembling a wickedly sharp folding knife, another item he'd procured from the supermarket. "You should try to rest, Micah," he said without looking up, his movements fluid and precise. "I can't. The noise is too loud," I admitted, leaning against the counter. The noise wasn't external. It was the reckless pulse of adrenaline and the memory of his intensity at the gas station. He finally looked up, those startling blue eyes fixing on me. In the dim kitchen light, his expression was unreadable, softened slightly by fatigue, yet still radiating competence. "That's why your father prepared," he said, his voice low. "He knew that when the end comes, the real danger is always people. Panic is loud. You handled that man at the gas station easily," I said, the words slipping out, tinged with that confusing, hot admiration. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a rare sight. "I'm trained to be loud when others are quiet, and quiet when others are loud. Keeps you alive." I took a slow step closer, driven by a recklessness that felt both foreign and necessary. "You're the only person who hasn't panicked. Except maybe my sister now. I'm trained not to panic. And your sister is driven by the instinct to survive, now that her old life is ashes. That's a good kind of motivation." The air between us had grown thick, charged with the unspoken tension that had been building since I saw him stand his ground against the angry driver. His gaze dropped briefly to my mouth before snapping back to my eyes. We were inches apart, the only sound the hissing static from the old TV in the other room. I reached out, hesitantly, and placed a hand on his arm, right where the muscle corded under his fatigues. The heat of his body was immediate and potent. "Thorne," I breathed, the word a question, a surrender. He didn't speak. He gently placed the cleaned knife on the counter, his large hand coming up to cup the back of my neck. He didn't pull me toward him, he simply closed the distance, his mouth finding mine in a kiss that was both intense and urgent. It wasn't soft. It was the hard, demanding kiss of a desperate man who knows the world might end tomorrow. He tasted of sweat and focus, and for a fleeting, necessary moment, the impending asteroid, the betrayal, and the panic of the city all dissolved. I clung to him, meeting his intensity with my own, seeking a moment of fierce, vital connection before the countdown finished. His fingers tightened, anchoring me. It was raw, immediate, and terrifyingly hot. A moment later, he broke the kiss, his forehead resting against mine. We were both breathing hard. "That was a very bad idea," he murmured, his voice rough. "Why?" I whispered. "Because I have a mission." "And you're not a mission. You're the cargo I'm supposed to deliver to the bunker." He pulled back, his eyes dark with conflict. "But there's no time left for good ideas. Get some sleep, Micah. We leave in 2 days." Scouting and countdown. The next 48 hours were a relentless blur of planning and preparation. Day 1, Thorne, Kyle, and Daniel left before dawn. They took the smaller, more inconspicuous gray truck, blending into the early morning flow of service vehicles before the military patrols tightened. Their objective was to scout every unpaved, unpatrolled road, within a 50-mile radius that might connect to the highway network outside the lockdown perimeter. Clara and I used the time to refine the supply list. With Maya's input, we prioritized the most calorie-dense and medically essential items from the food hall, realizing we might have to jettison non-critical weight. We also packed Dad's precious wind-up radio and high-frequency comms gear into his go-bag. The news was a sickening loop of false reassurances. The president appeared on screen, asking for patience and order. The visible effect of the meteor, which Chuck had warned about, was now undeniable. By midday, the atmosphere was slightly off color, the sunlight a sickly, hazy yellow, the first sign of the comet's tail grazing the upper atmosphere. Day 2. Thorne and the others returned late in the afternoon, covered in dust and sweat, but with grimly good news. "We found a path," Thorne announced, spreading the map out on the counter. "It's an old power line maintenance trail that runs parallel to the state route for about 30 miles. It's barely asphalt, cuts through deep woods and private property, and avoids 3 major military checkpoints." "Is it guarded?" Clara asked, her pencil poised over the map. "Not currently. Too rough. But it won't be easy. We'll need 4-wheel drive and chains. The second truck will be critical for pulling the first one out when it gets stuck." Daniel pulled out a digital camera and showed us satellite images he'd downloaded from an abandoned gas station computer. The photos showed the trail, a muddy, barely visible track slicing through thick stands of trees. We finalized the packing. The black truck would carry the people and the most critical gear, comms, medical supplies, and the water jugs. The gray truck would be the heavy lifter, carrying the bulk of the food and extra fuel cans. That evening, the tension in the house was palpable, electric. 4 days, the number hung in the air like a death sentence. I found Thorne in the living room, staring at the muted images on the old TV. I didn't approach him this time. I simply stood beside him, watching the clock tick down on the news banner. He turned his head slowly, and the unspoken weight of our encounter 2 nights ago was heavy between us. "We leave at 0300 tomorrow," he said, his voice low, strictly professional. "We'll use the hours before dawn. It's the highest risk, but the lowest visibility for the patrols." "I know." He reached out, his calloused thumb gently brushing the skin of my wrist. This time, the touch was softer, yet held all the intensity of the kiss. "You're strong, Micah. You haven't broken. You're your father's daughter." I leaned into the warmth of his touch, needing the momentary distraction from the apocalyptic fear closing in. I could still taste the intensity of his kiss. "Just get us there, Thorne," I said, looking up at him, allowing the vulnerability to show. He squeezed my wrist once, a promise. That's the mission, no matter what. The team was set. The route was chosen. The countdown was at 4 days. The moment of fragile, reckless quiet was over. We were leaving the city. The house was cold and still when the alarm went off at 0300. The darkness outside was a heavy, suffocating blanket, offering the perfect cover. There was no time for goodbyes to the ghost of Dad's life, only the absolute, tense focus of departure. The team moved with the silent, practiced efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Thorne was the anchor, his presence a silent command. Kyle and Daniel secured the doors and loaded the remaining small items. Maya, clutching her sleeping son Leo, climbed into the gray support truck with her husband Daniel, riding shotgun. Clara took the back seat of the black truck. I took the passenger seat next to Thorne. The air between us was still thick from the intensity of the night before, a dangerous, unspoken current beneath the surface of professionalism. The memory of his mouth on mine was a vivid, shocking counterpoint to the impending doom. "Ready," Thorne said, his voice a low rumble. "Ready," I echoed. He started the engine, a low, powerful sound that seemed deafening in the sleeping neighborhood. We pulled out first, the black truck's large tires silently rolling over the lawn. Kyle, driving the gray truck, followed close behind. Thorne navigated the initial, choked city streets with astonishing speed. The lockdown was real. Every major intersection was eerily deserted, except for the heavy, blocky shapes of military vehicles parked like concrete barriers. He stuck to the narrow, residential streets, always just 2 steps ahead of any patrol. After 30 minutes of heart-stopping near misses, we reached the city's outer edge, where the suburban developments bled into deep, wooded acreage. "Here we go," Thorne murmured, turning off the asphalt onto the powerline maintenance trail. The black truck immediately bucked and groaned, sinking into thick, unforgiving mud. This wasn't a road, it was a scar on the earth. Trees pressed in close, the headlights only illuminating a churning tunnel of thicket and shadow. The going was brutally slow. For the next 5 hours, the journey was a violent, lurching dance. We drove through axle-deep ruts and slid precariously over wet roots. Twice, Thorne had to stop and use the truck's winch to pull the gray truck through particularly difficult sections. Despite the punishing ride, the sense of confinement eventually gave way to a stark, exhilarating freedom. We were off the grid, out of the cage. As the sun finally broke through the tree line, painting the mud a dismal brown, Thorne hit a smooth section of the trail that suddenly opened onto a neglected 2-lane highway. "We're clear of the perimeter," Thorne announced, acceleration pressing me back into the seat. "We can make time now." The highway was clear, almost pristine. We were heading west, a journey of well over 1,000 miles from Indiana to the remote mountains of Colorado. The sheer distance underscored the monumental task ahead. We drove for several hours, the rhythm of the road a hypnotic counterpoint to the terrifying reality. The sky was still slightly hazed, the sunlight thin and sickly. I glanced back at Clara. She was awake, watching the passing fields, her hands clasped tightly. When she met my eyes, a quick, familiar smirk touched her lips. She gave me a knowing, exaggerated wink, then mimed a quick kissing motion. I felt a blush crawl up my neck. I knew then. She hadn't been sleeping that night. Clara had witnessed the kiss. The memory of the hard, desperate contact, combined with her sisterly teasing, was a painful, unwelcome distraction. "Shut up," I mouthed silently. Clara simply smiled, a moment of startling normalcy in the apocalypse. It was a clear signal that she'd noticed the way Thorne and I avoided looking at each other for too long. The congestion and the mechanic. We crossed the state line into Ohio by late morning, but the freedom was short-lived. Just past a crumbling overpass, the highway began to snarl, not with soldiers, but with raw, terrified humanity. The road ahead was a nightmare, a solid line of headlights stretching to the horizon, a slow, agonizing funeral procession of escape. People had clearly bypassed the military checkpoints on the main routes and were funneling onto this secondary highway, desperately heading west. After 20 minutes of inching forward, we came upon a rusty sedan pulled precariously onto the narrow shoulder, its hood up, spewing a pathetic plume of white smoke. A man stood next to it, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat. He was a picture of miserable hopelessness. His face was streaked with grease and exhaustion, and he was holding the hand of a small girl with wide, fearful eyes and tangled blonde hair. Thorne pulled the black truck over, just ahead of the broken sedan. "Kyle, secure the perimeter," Thorne ordered over the comms. "Daniel, with me." "That little girl looks frozen," Clara murmured, leaning forward. "And he's broken." We approached the man. He looked up, his expression a mix of desperate hope and resigned despair. "Engine block cracked," he mumbled, kicking the tire softly. "No water, nothing. We've been here since dawn. Can't move it." "I'm Travis," the man said, managing a shaky introduction. "And this is Lola. She's 5. Lola just stared at us, clutching a tattered stuffed rabbit. Just then, Maya emerged from the gray truck, holding her son Leo's hand. Leo immediately walked toward the new girl. "Hi, I'm Leo and this is my little sister Lola," the boy chirped proudly, grabbing the girl's hand. Travis looked confused. "Leo? Lola is my daughter." "Oops. I meant, I like her like a sister," Leo corrected, his eyes wide. Travis managed a weary half-smile. "I'm a mechanic. Irony, right? I can fix anything that's got parts. Just not this. Not now." Clara stepped forward, her professional facade fully intact. "Travis, we can't stop, but we have room for you and Lola. We're heading west, and we need every resource we can get." "You're leaving the city? Where are you going?" he asked, his voice laced with disbelief. "Somewhere safe." "You're a mechanic. You just said you're a valuable resource," I said, looking at Thorne for confirmation. Thorne nodded once, his eyes still on the traffic. 2 minutes, Micah. We take them, or we leave them. Decision. I looked at Lola, then at the hopeless line of traffic stretching into the distance. We couldn't leave 2 people with a dead car and 4 days left. "We take them," I declared. Travis's relief was immediate, washing over his face like rain. He scooped up Lola and a small backpack. We quickly loaded them into the gray truck with Kyle, Daniel, Maya, and Leo. "Welcome aboard, Travis. You just earned your keep," Kyle said dryly, as he helped the small girl into the back seat. The abandoned town. Thorne immediately pulled the trucks off the congested highway and onto a barely marked county road, accelerating quickly to leave the human bottleneck behind. We drove another 3 hours, eventually taking a detour into a vast, empty expanse of the Midwest. The towns we passed were ghost shells. People hadn't fled. They had vanished into the earth, into the military shelters, or simply retreated into their homes. "We need to stop," Thorne said, his voice rough with fatigue. "We need to refuel the cans, check the tires, and we need proper breathing equipment. The air is going to get worse." He steered the trucks toward a town marked on the map simply as Harding. Harding was dead. No cars, no lights, no sound. The wind rustled through the main street, kicking up hazy yellow dust. We pulled up to a small, single-story main street with a hardware store, a general market, and an old auto garage. "Target the hardware store and the garage," Thorne instructed. "Travis, you're up. See if you can find anything useful at the garage. Tools, fluids, anything that will keep the trucks running. Clara, Maya, you and the kids stay in the gray truck. Micah, you're with me." We approached the general market. Thorne used a simple pry bar to pop the lock on the back door, quick, efficient, and loud. Inside, the store was surprisingly intact. Only minor signs of early looting, some empty chip bags and spilled liquor. But the racks of work clothes, outerwear, and, crucially, a rack of respirator masks meant for construction and painting were untouched. "Gear up," Thorne ordered, grabbing a thick, dark canvas coat. I found a pair of sturdy, comfortable hiking boots that fit perfectly, along with thick wool socks and a heavy work jacket. Clara and I had grabbed only our clothes in the initial rush, so this was critical. I pulled down a box of industrial-grade gas masks and distributed them to Daniel and Kyle when they came in to help load up. Travis returned from the garage 20 minutes later, his face smeared with grease but his eyes bright. He was carrying a large toolbox and several sealed containers of specialized engine oil and coolant. "I drained every drop of high-grade fluid I could find, and I have enough tools to rebuild a carburetor on the side of the road. We're good for repairs." While the others secured the new gear, I found Thorne by the checkout counter, where he was looking at a half-used spool of heavy, industrial chain. "This is better than rope," he said, his voice low. "For the trail," I confirmed, nodding. The proximity, the shared urgency, was like a physical heat. My focus was supposed to be on the chain, on the gear, but my eyes were drawn to the faint smudge of oil on his cheekbone, to the intense concentration in his eyes. "It's getting easier to forget what we're running from," I murmured, watching the way his thumb rubbed the cold metal. He looked up quickly, his expression shuddered. "Don't. The moment you forget is the moment you stop watching your six. We are 4 days away from the end of everything you know. Keep that fear hot, Micah. It's what keeps you sharp." He was pushing me away again, reinforcing the professional wall. But the contradiction, the way his body language demanded distance while his eyes held a dark, unmistakable acknowledgement of the chemistry between us, only intensified the attraction. "You're a terrible liar, Thorne," I said, forcing a small smile. He stepped closer than necessary, ostensibly to reach for a pair of work gloves on a shelf behind me. The scent of sweat and smoke, the smell of the journey, was overwhelming. His breath was warm on my ear. "I'm not lying, Micah. I'm prioritizing," he whispered, his voice deep. "And right now, my only priority is that you survive. Don't make it complicated." He grabbed the gloves and backed away before I could reply, his face once again an unreadable mask of military focus. As we loaded the trucks, Clara walked up to me, bumping my shoulder gently. "Don't make it complicated," she mimicked in a low, teasing voice, rolling her eyes. "He's a soldier, Micah. He uses big words to cover up the fact that he wants to drag you into the nearest coat rack and kiss you until the asteroid hits. I saw it, by the way. Get a room." "Shut up, Clara," I hissed, trying to hide my smile as I threw a box of gas masks into the back of the black truck. "It's fine. He's handsome and capable. Just don't be a fool. You just got rid of one pathetic man. You don't need to fall for a noble doomed one." Her teasing was surprisingly grounding, a reminder that we were sisters, and that even facing the end of the world, she was still looking out for me. We spent another hour securing the fuel, draining the tanks from the abandoned gas station across the street into every last one of the jerry cans. The black truck was now ready for the next leg, packed with supplies, fueled and crewed by a desperate, dysfunctional, and suddenly very resourceful team. I thought of the bunker in Colorado, the concrete fortress Dad had built. I hadn't seen it in 10 years, not since I was a teenager, and the memory was hazy, colored by teenage embarrassment over Dad's crazy hobbies. Now it was the only real thing left in the world. The clock was still ticking, 4 days to impact. The only option was to drive faster, stop less, and hope the mechanic we picked up could keep our engines running. The team is fully stocked and on the road. The sun had climbed past its zenith. Its light filtered through the atmosphere to cast a dull, pervasive yellow wash over the world. We had been driving hard for 9 hours, putting distance between ourselves and the panicked congestion, thanks to Thorne's relentless pace and Travis's reassurance about the truck's vitals. As we traveled, the information from the high-frequency radio Dad had kept in the go bag painted a chilling picture. Official broadcasts were now interspersed with long periods of static, and the voices that did break through were increasingly panicked, no longer calm newscasters but desperate military commanders losing control. The timeline was compressing, the official lie was crumbling. "We need to swap trucks," Thorne announced over the comms, his voice tight. "The black truck is the most valuable target. It's got the comms and the medical gear. Travis, you and Lola ride with us. We need your eyes on the engine, and Micah's eyes on the map." We pulled over near the outskirts of a small town called Redding. Barely visible on the horizon, the transfer was quick and silent. Travis, though clearly overwhelmed, moved Lola and his toolbox into the back seat of the black truck alongside Clara. "We need to prioritize better protective gear," Thorne said, addressing the group. "The gas masks are for dust and immediate chemical contaminants, but the manual emphasizes heavy, puncture-resistant outer layers for the impact window. And thermal blankets. That store in Harding was too focused on work gear. We need military surplus or specialized outdoor equipment." Travis, scanning the map, pointed. "There's a small outdoor equipment and hunting store marked here, on the edge of Redding. Usually caters to hikers. If anyone has heavy-duty jackets and proper thermal insulation, they would." The destination was set. Redding, Ohio. The looted landscape. Redding was eerily quiet, more like Harding, but with a palpable undercurrent of violence. Doors were kicked in, and the occasional discarded shopping cart lay overturned on the street. Thorne bypassed the main center, taking us directly to a large corrugated metal building that housed Buck's Surplus and Outdoor. We parked the trucks behind the building, nestled against a row of large, fragrant cedar trees, affording us crucial cover. "Kyle, secure the perimeter. Daniel, you watch the trucks and the kids. Travis, stay by the engine with your toolbox," Thorne ordered. "Micah, Clara, you're with me. We move fast. Prioritize insulated blankets and outerwear." Inside, the store was a wreck, but the specialized items remained. The front section had been ransacked. Fishing lures, camp chairs, cheap plastic tents, but the serious gear was untouched. Heavy wool blankets, military-grade parkas, and high-quality boots were still stacked on shelves. Clara and I immediately started grabbing the thickest, darkest outerwear we could find, focusing on layers that could repel debris and retain heat. "These jackets look brand new, Micah," Clara whispered, pulling a heavy, dark green shell off a rack. "They'll be perfect for the impact." "We need the thermal underwear and wool layers too," I instructed, already thinking of the chilling precautions outlined in Dad's manual. While we worked, Thorne was in the back, near the gun racks, but he was focused on the corner. He returned carrying 3 heavy-duty emergency blankets, not the flimsy foil kind, but thick military wool that would be critical for insulation. He handed one to me. As our fingers brushed, a jolt of that familiar, intense electricity ran through my arm. The awareness of him, his scent, the powerful width of his shoulders under his uniform, the way his eyes never settled on one spot, was a constant, burning distraction. "You okay?" Clara asked, watching me closely as I stared at the wool blanket. "Fine," I snapped, too quickly. Clara gave a pointed, conspiratorial look back toward Thorne, who was now scanning the front windows. She shook her head slightly, mouthing, "Unbelievable." Suddenly, the easy rhythm of our scavenging shattered. A sharp, loud crash came from the front of the store, followed by the sound of splintering wood. "Down." Thorne roared, shoving Clara and me behind a massive display of camouflage netting. The ambush. The front door burst inward, revealing 3 figures. Not uniformed soldiers, but hardened civilians. They were men in rough clothes, wielding makeshift weapons, a heavy length of pipe, a crowbar, and, chillingly, an old-fashioned pump-action shotgun. "Check the back." "Hear noises," one of the men yelled, his voice raw with greed and desperation. "They saw the trucks," Thorne hissed, drawing the heavy pistol tucked into his belt. "Stay low. Don't move unless I tell you." The air thickened with immediate, lethal intent. This wasn't a civilian panic. This was organized looting. Thorne, pressed tightly against the netting with us, moved the pistol slightly. "They're looking for high-value targets. Food, fuel, guns. They'll see us as easy pickings." A tall, wiry man wielding the pipe stalked past our hiding spot. Clara flinched, biting down hard on her fist to stifle a sound. "Micah, quietly. Get to the side door. Move toward the back parking lot. If you hear shots, run for the cedar trees and get to Kyle," Thorne ordered, his voice barely audible. "I'm not leaving you," I whispered back. "That is an order," he grated, his eyes cold and commanding. "Go. I need to draw them out, not trap myself with 2 civilians." I hesitated, but the look in his eyes, a furious mix of duty and something fiercely protective, forced my compliance. I grabbed Clara's arm. We crawled under a low shelf, slipping into a shadowed corridor that led toward the rear emergency exit. As soon as we cleared the main showroom, Thorne exploded into action. "Hey, looking for something?" The sound of his voice drew the attention of the two closest men. Thorne fired 2 quick shots into the ceiling, the deafening cracks echoing through the metal building. Bang! Bang! The shots were a diversion and a signal. They were loud, intended to draw the attention of his men outside and terrify the attackers. "We've got hostiles inside. Kyle, perimeter alert," Thorne barked over his comms. The attackers, realizing they were facing armed resistance, retreated toward the back office, but the one with the shotgun, startled, wheeled and fired a blasting shot that chewed a huge hole in the wall just inches from where Thorne had stood. We reached the back exit. I shoved the crash bar and stumbled out into the parking lot. Kyle and Daniel were already running toward the building. "What happened?" Kyle yelled. "Thorne's pinned. Armed hostiles. We need to get the trucks out of sight," I shouted, adrenaline flooding my system. "Travis, get in the driver's seat, pull both trucks around the cedar trees, and wait for the signal," Daniel ordered. Travis, pale but focused, immediately jumped into the driver's seat of the black truck, his hands already gripping the ignition. Trapped and consumed, Thorne appeared in the doorway seconds later, sliding out with the speed of a professional. "Too many. They've barricaded the front and they've got weapons. We're stuck here for now." He was breathing heavily, a streak of dirt across his cheek. "They're not leaving. They know we have the supplies." We quickly retreated into the thick cedar trees, blending into the heavy shadows. Travis drove both trucks deep into the woods, camouflaging them expertly with brush and tarps. "We're trapped in Redding," Thorne announced, checking his magazine. "It's too hot to move the trucks. We'll lose valuable time." The silence that descended was heavy, punctuated only by the distant sound of the attackers securing their perimeter around the store. "We just lost hours," I whispered, looking at the sky. The yellow haze was growing denser. Clara, leaning against a tree, pulled out her phone and checked the date and time. Her face was grim. "We are stuck here until dark, at least. We have exactly 24 hours until estimated first impact." The final countdown was here. Thorne pulled me aside, deep into the thicket, away from the others. The tension that had been crackling between us finally ignited, exacerbated by the sheer terror and the near-death experience. "We can't stay here," he muttered, his voice low and ragged. "We have to find another way out of this town. We'll move at 2300. It's the last window. And until then?" I challenged, meeting his gaze. My heart was pounding, not just from the fear of the armed men, but from the desperate recklessness he inspired. He grabbed my shoulders, his eyes burning into mine with an intense, desperate hunger that obliterated the soldier's mask. He was a man, not a mission. "Until then," he grated, pulling me against the rough bark of the tree. His mouth descended on mine in a kiss that was a savage, necessary consumption. It was a kiss of pure, unfiltered demand, a primal need for connection and life in the face of imminent death. He wasn't asking for permission. He was staking a claim, an acknowledgement of the raw, undeniable bond forged in panic and survival. I melted against him, meeting his urgency with my own desperation. The terror of the ticking clock, the shock of the gunfire, the betrayal, the grief, it all channeled into this single, reckless act. My hands tangled in his close-cropped hair, pulling him closer. He lifted me, pressing me back against the rough tree, his body a heavy, reassuring weight that blocked out the rest of the world. Every touch, every movement was charged with the finality of the end, the fierce, vital necessity of living fully, completely, now. We didn't need words. We needed proof of life. He moved quickly, efficiently, tearing away the rough layers of clothing that separated us. The urgency was overwhelming, a chaotic release of fear and desire. The rough cedar needles pressed against my back. The world narrowed to the sound of his ragged breathing, the frantic beat of my own heart, and the fierce, desperate rhythm of our bodies colliding. It was a raw, hard, and overwhelming moment of connection, not romance, but flesh and blood proof that we were real, alive, and desperately seeking warmth against the cold abyss. It was the only sanity left. When it was over, he lowered me back to the ground. We were both breathing shallowly, the immediate rush giving way to a shared, stunned silence. He covered me instantly with a discarded parka, his eyes heavy with conflicting emotion, regret, duty, but also a deep, protective satisfaction. "I won't apologize," he murmured, his voice thick. "Don't," I whispered, pulling the parka tight. The fierce intimacy had changed everything. We were no longer just driver and passenger. Thorne was the first to regain control. He stood, his uniform rumpled, the discipline immediately snapping back into place. "Get your gear." We lost hours, but we gained vital supplies. "We hold position until 2300, then we move," he said, his voice now clipped and professional, hiding the frantic man who had just risked everything. But the mask was flawed. As he turned to go, he looked back at me, his blue eyes holding a look of furious, desperate commitment. I'll get us to that bunker, Micah. I swear it. I simply nodded, pulling myself together, pulling the fierce hot memory into my core. 24 hours. The clock was ticking, and the danger outside was real. We had to move. The final, perilous drive to the bunker was about to begin. The hours spent hiding in the cedar thicket were a slow, agonizing slide toward the point of no return. The knowledge that we had only 24 hours until first impact was a heavy, suffocating weight, compounded by the presence of the armed hostiles surrounding the hardware store. The intensity of the encounter with Thorne, the reckless, vital act of making love against the bark of a tree, left me feeling simultaneously shattered and fundamentally recalibrated. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a fierce, immediate commitment, born of shared trauma and survival, a recognition that in the face of annihilation, all the old rules were meaningless. He was my anchor, and I was his momentary lapse of control. We were spread out in the deep shadows of the thicket, the 6 adults and 2 children huddled together, wrapped in the newly acquired military wool blankets. Clara sat closest to Travis, who was softly explaining the function of a differential gear to Lola and Leo to keep them distracted. It was during these quiet hours that I noticed a subtle shift between Clara and the mechanic. Clara, usually so rigid and focused on systems, was listening to Travis with a rare softness. His mechanical competence and his unwavering devotion to his daughter Lola seemed to appeal to the same deep, protective instincts that defined my sister. When she handed him a piece of ration bar, their fingers brushed, and I saw a fleeting, mutual recognition, a flicker of warmth that mirrored the intense heat Thorne and I shared, only much slower, much gentler. "We can't just sit here," Clara whispered to me, her voice tight. "Every hour we lose is 100 miles less between us and safety." "Thorne knows," I replied, pulling my thick jacket tighter. "He's waiting for the deepest cover of night." The midnight breakout. As the moon dipped below the horizon around 2300, the light pollution from the far-off highway finally vanished, and the world outside the cedar trees became a study in absolute darkness. "Time," Thorne murmured, the word cutting the silence like a knife. He moved with immediate, silent authority. He didn't consult. He simply informed. "Daniel and Kyle will create a diversion at the front of the store. They'll use the truck horns and flashlights. As soon as they draw fire, Travis, you start the black truck. Maya, you secure the kids. Clara, you ride with Kyle in the gray truck. Micah, you're with me." He looked at me, his eyes catching the faintest hint of starlight, and the look he gave me was a silent, desperate communication. Survive. The plan was a high-risk gamble. Lure the attackers away from the parking lot long enough for the 2 heavy trucks to break cover and escape the town before the hostiles could recover. Daniel and Kyle slipped into the darkness, moving like shadows toward the front of the hardware store. 2 minutes later, a sudden cacophony of noise erupted, the continuous, blaring horn of the gray truck and the blinding, erratic flashing of the headlights, immediately followed by the loud crack of gunfire from the startled attackers. "Go!" Thorne yelled. Travis immediately turned the key. The black truck's engine roared to life, its sound a terrifying magnet in the silent night. Thorne pulled the black truck out of the cedar grove, driving straight toward the main street. We swung wide, the headlights momentarily illuminating the frantic silhouettes of the attackers running toward the front of the store, thinking their prize was being driven away. As soon as we cleared the building, Thorne slammed the wheel, turning sharply onto a narrow dirt service road he had identified earlier. The gray truck, driven expertly by Kyle, caught up and fell in tight behind us, its powerful engine masked by the noise of the first vehicle. We drove out of Reading with reckless speed, the tires throwing up plumes of dust and dirt. The escape was successful, but we had lost nearly a full day. As we hit the main state highway again, Thorne's voice was grim. "We have exactly 24 hours to impact. We can't afford another stop." The final dash. The rest of the night and the following morning were a single, exhausting blur of hard, fast driving. We took turns keeping watch, with Travis and Thorne swapping out driving duty, pushing the heavy trucks to their limit. As the sun rose, the atmosphere had grown palpably worse. The light was no longer just yellow. It was an oppressive, sickly orange, casting shadows that looked unnatural and wrong. The sky itself seemed heavy, pressing down on the earth. "The reports are changing," I announced, monitoring the radio as we sped across Kansas. "The official line is gone. It's chaos. They're calling it a K-Level Extinction Event." Clara, who was cradling the head of a sleeping Lola, shuddered. "We were teenagers the last time we were at that bunker, Micah. Do you even remember the lock code? Dad made us memorize it 10 years ago. It's the date of Mom's birthday, backward." "I remember," I assured her, though the memory was thin and frayed. "Good thing your memory is photographic," Clara sighed, then looked at Travis, who was expertly navigating a washed-out section of road. "You're doing great, Travis. You're keeping these beasts running." Travis glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his face tired but resolute. "Just doing my job, Clara. Seems the world needs a good mechanic after all." The easy familiarity of their exchange was a small, fragile comfort. The journey was a constant, tense negotiation between the human toll and the mechanical stress. Maya was constantly checking on the children, administering electrolytes and trying to keep their spirits up. The sight of Leo and Lola, completely oblivious to the scale of the impending disaster, finding strange joy in the lurching ride in the orange sky, was heartbreaking and motivating in equal measure. I spent my non-driving hours in the passenger seat next to Thorne, poring over the map. The physical intimacy we had shared had intensified the concentration in the truck. Every touch of my hand on the map, every shared glance, was fraught with the memory of the cedar grove. Once, Thorne reached over and gently adjusted the heavy wool jacket I was wearing, pulling the collar up to my chin. His fingers lingered for a second on my cheek. "You're focused." "That's good," he said, his voice husky. "I have to be. I'm thinking about what you told me. About the K-Level event. Dad's manual says we need to be below ground at least 3 hours before impact to avoid the initial atmospheric superheat and firestorm." Thorne nodded, his jaw tight. "That's why we don't stop. We have to make it inside that final 3-hour window. The point of no return." We entered the treacherous mountain roads of Colorado just as the clock ticked down to 6 hours remaining. The final 300 miles were the hardest. The elevation was brutal, and the roads were barely maintained, winding through steep, jagged passes. Travis had to pull over twice in the space of an hour to make crucial, grease-covered adjustments to the transmission on the gray truck, buying us precious miles. At the 3-hour mark, the world outside changed with horrifying suddenness. I was watching the GPS, calculating our ETA. We were only 75 miles from the coordinates of the bunker, maybe 3 hours of hard driving through the passes. Then, the sun, already a dim orange disk, vanished entirely. The sky didn't turn black. It turned a terrifying, incandescent, sickly crimson. The entire atmosphere seemed to glow with a destructive heat, and a low, guttural roar rolled over the mountains, the sound not of thunder, but of massive displacement. "What was that?" Clara shrieked from the back. "That's it," Thorne said, his voice calm, but his knuckles white against the wheel. "First impact. Not the main body, but the debris field. The asteroid is breaking up in the upper atmosphere. We just hit the 3-hour countdown for the primary kinetic energy wave." I looked at the window. Small, bright pinpricks of light, tiny meteors, were visible streaking across the scarlet sky, leaving brief, brilliant trails. The air inside the truck felt heavy and stifling. "Thorne, the manual," I gasped, clutching the heavy document. "We need to be underground now. That firestorm will be here in minutes. We have to push." 70 miles. The main body is still coming. "Travis, do you trust the engines?" Travis, who had been staring out the window, snapped back to reality. "They're overheating, but I can hold them. We push. Daniel, Kyle. Full speed. Stick to our rear." Thorne yelled into the comms. The final drive was a terrifying, high-speed scramble against an invisible, atmospheric enemy. We weren't driving to the bunker anymore. We were racing the flames of global annihilation. As we rounded a high, forested bend, the sight was apocalyptic. A wide swath of the forest below us was already engulfed in flames, the firestorm ignited by the superheated atmospheric debris. The heat, even through the sealed windows of the truck, was instantly palpable. Thorne glanced at me, his eyes full of the knowledge that this was the end of the line. He reached across the console, his hand finding mine, his grip crushing. "Almost there, Micah. Don't break now." I squeezed his hand back, the touch of fierce, desperate confirmation of our shared fate. "We're going to make it," I vowed, staring straight ahead at the last remaining miles of the road. We have to. We were the last, desperate specks of humanity, racing toward a concrete hole in the ground, with the sky literally on fire and the final crushing blow of the meteor just minutes away. The final miles were a sensory overload of fear and survival. The air was thick and metallic, the sky a blazing, apocalyptic crimson, and the roar of the atmospheric friction was deafening, vibrating through our chests. The forest around us was fully ablaze, turning the narrow mountain road into a blazing gauntlet. "We're 3 minutes out," Thorne shouted over the howling wind and the crackle of fire, his voice raw. He drove with reckless, instinctual precision, the black truck bounding over rocks and debris. "We have to suit up. Now!" I yelled back, scrambling to reach the gear we had scavenged. Clara, Travis, and I worked in frantic synchronization, pulling the thick, military-grade parkas, the heavy gloves, and the industrial respirator masks over our heads. The gas masks, though not fully protective against the heat, would filter the ash and thick smoke that was now choking the cabin. The entire group, split between the two trucks, was now encased in the heavy, dark protective gear, bulky, anonymous shapes fighting the elements. "Coordinates reached," Thorne announced, slamming on the brakes. We had arrived at the exact spot Dad had marked, but instead of the clear patch of hidden ground I vaguely remembered from a decade ago, the world was a blinding, chaotic blizzard of ash and fire. The intense heat pressed against the truck's thick glass, and the visibility was near zero. "It should be right here. The door is flush with the ground. covered by a hydraulic plate, I yelled, consulting the GPS coordinates on Dad's rugged old tablet. I can't see a damned thing, Thorne roared, his voice muffled by the mask. The ashfall is too thick. We're sitting ducks. He slammed the truck into park. Everyone out. Kyle, Daniel, fan out 180 degrees. Find the plate. Travis, keep the engines idling. We need power for the hydraulics. We spilled out of the trucks and into the blazing inferno of the mountainside. The heat was instant and overwhelming, making the thick parkas feel useless. The ash was so dense it was impossible to distinguish ground from air. I moved with Thorne, the thick wool of our jackets brushing as we swept our hands over the smoky, uneven earth, searching for the telltale edge of Dad's hidden steel hatch. It should be 10 meters from the center pin, I cried, fighting the urge to tear the oppressive mask off my face. Thorne dropped to his knees, clawing through the thick volcanic dust. Found something. Metal! He shouted commands to the gray truck, which pulled forward slightly. Kyle, who was already at Thorne's side, unhooked the powerful winch from the front bumper. They connected the winch to a solid point on the hidden metal plate, the keyhole for the massive hatch. Thorne fumbled in his jacket, pulling out a sealed pouch containing the bunker keycard and the hydraulic control switch. The combination was useless without the power. Travis, we need maximum power from the battery for the hydraulics. Now! Thorne yelled. Travis, a true mechanic to his core, didn't need to be told twice. He revved the engine of the black truck until it screamed, delivering a surge of power through the attached cables. With a grinding metallic groan that momentarily drowned out the apocalyptic roar of the atmosphere, the massive steel door began to rise. It unfolded upward and backward on its powerful hydraulics, revealing a cavernous concrete ramp leading down into absolute darkness. Relief, pure, profound, and physical, slammed into me. It was the end of the race. Go! 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 Thorne screamed, pushing me toward the black void. We scrambled back into the trucks. Travis was the last to dive into the cab, followed by Thorne. Hold on! Thorne yelled. He drove the black truck straight down the steep, narrow concrete ramp. We were descending into the earth, escaping the fire. The gray truck followed immediately behind us. Just as the black truck's rear wheels cleared the surface, Thorne hit the switch to close the hydraulic door. The colossal steel plate began to descend with agonizing slowness. We were plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness, lit only by the truck's powerful headlamps reflecting off the cold, damp concrete walls. Then, just as the hatch slammed shut with an echoing final clang, a sound reached us, a sound that shook the very ground beneath the tires, making the immense concrete structure shudder. It was a cataclysmic, deafening crunch, the main kinetic wave of the meteor impact hitting the Earth's surface. It was the sound of the world ending. Deep beneath the Earth, silence. A heavy, terrifying, absolute silence, broken only by the idling of the trucks and the ragged, shallow breathing inside our masks. We had made it, with less than a second to spare. Thorne shut off the engine. The only light now came from the internal cabin lamps. He ripped off his mask, his face covered in soot, but his eyes bright with triumph and exhaustion. Welcome home, Micah, he rasped. One by one, the group emerged from the trucks. The air in the bunker entrance was cold, dry, and clean, purified by a heavy-duty ventilation system that was already humming softly. The relief was overwhelming. Clara stumbled to the ground, pulling off her mask, and let out a choked sob, the delayed release of 48 hours of terror. Maya rushed to check on Leo and Lola, pulling them out of the gray truck, their faces smudged, but miraculously unharmed. Travis, ever the mechanic, immediately moved to the nearest concrete wall. This thing is airtight. No joke. The entrance led into a large vehicle bay, easily capable of holding our 2 trucks and more. The air was cool, dry, and sterile. Thorne, despite his exhaustion, immediately went into tactical assessment mode. Daniel, Kyle, seal and secure the airlock. Travis, put the trucks on trickle charge and check the main power console. I took the lead, guiding the exhausted group further into the bunker. Follow me. Dad built this place to be self-sufficient. The bunker was a sprawling testament to Dad's meticulous paranoia. It wasn't just a concrete box. It was a pressurized, multi-level fortress. The main living area was spacious, dominated by a large stainless steel kitchen and a communal dining table. Off the main area were several small, clean bedrooms, each with built-in bunks and storage. The true marvels, however, lay deeper inside. First was the storage bay, floor-to-ceiling shelving absolutely packed with provisions. Cans, dried goods, vacuum-sealed bags of rice and flour, and massive industrial drums of purified water. He budgeted for 3 years, I announced, running my hand over a case of canned chicken. He always said 3 years was the absolute minimum to survive the nuclear winter and the initial societal collapse. Clara stared at the sheer quantity of food, her face pale. My God, he was ready. Next was the water supply, a massive, gleaming stainless steel manifold leading to a deep well. Underground aquifer, I explained, remembering Dad's proud tour. Tapped deep enough to be contamination-proof. The water is filtered and stored in these cisterns. The sound of clean flowing water was a psychological balm. The most impressive feature was the hydroponic and aeroponic room. It was a sealed chamber, brightly lit by specialized pink-hued grow lamps. Rows upon rows of racks were set up with nutrient feeds and misting nozzles. We can grow fresh vegetables, and even some grains here, I explained. It's entirely self-sustaining. Dad called it the Arcadia Chamber. As the group settled, shedding their heavy gear, the weight of the last few days finally lifted. We were safe. We had food, water, and breathable air. Later that evening, the 8 of us gathered around the communal table. Thorne was across from me, his military bearing slightly relaxed but his focus still intense. Travis was talking animatedly to Clara about the bunker's excellent structural integrity, and I noticed Clara leaning in, genuinely captivated by his calm competence. The seeds of their attraction, sown on the road, were quietly taking root in the safety of the bunker, settling and static. The first few days were dedicated to establishing a routine. Thorne established a strict watch schedule, though he admitted the danger was now external to the bunker, not internal. Travis became indispensable, monitoring the massive diesel generator and the atmospheric scrubbers. Clara, with Maya's help, took command of the kitchen and medical inventory. The children, Leo and Lola, quickly adapted, finding a strange, exciting freedom in the endless concrete corridors. On day 4 post-impact, the rhythmic hum of the bunker's filtration system was our only constant. The main shockwaves had stopped, replaced by sporadic, minor ground tremors, the settling of a broken planet. Thorne, Travis, and Daniel went up to the surface hatch to check the atmospheric readings. They returned covered in layers of gritty, gray dust, confirming the outside temperature was dangerously low and the air quality lethal. Finally, on day 5, Thorne decided it was time to try the communication equipment. The anticipation was thick. Who, if anyone, was left? We gathered in the comms room, a small, insulated chamber filled with glowing dials and heavy-duty radio gear. I sat down at the main console, the large, high-frequency HF radio unit, glowing faintly in the dim room. The atmosphere should be stable enough now for HF transmissions to bounce, I explained, referencing Dad's extensive notes. The challenge is the sheer volume of space debris and the ionospheric disruption. I flipped the main power switch. The machine hummed to life, a comforting sound of technology enduring. I slowly turned the dial, searching the frequencies Gavin, Chuck's nephew, had given me, sending out a low-power beacon. The airwaves were a chaotic symphony of static, crackles, and strange electronic whispers. Hours passed, filled only with white noise and the desperate hope in the room. Finally, late that night, as Thorne sat next to me, his presence a steady weight, a faint, metallic signal sliced through the static. Wait. I have something. A call sign, I whispered, turning the dial with agonizing slowness. The voice was faint, distorted, and sounded impossibly distant, but it was human. This is Echo 6 Alpha, to any station. Is anyone out there? Does anyone copy? Repeat. This is Echo 6 Alpha. I snatched the microphone, my hand shaking. Thorne immediately placed a firm, steadying hand over mine. Echo 6 Alpha, this is Whiskey Papa Bravo, I responded, using Dad's old call sign. We copy. Loud and clear. Where are you, Echo 6 Alpha? We made it. We're deep underground. Who is this? A moment of static, then the voice returned, stronger this time, laced with sheer disbelief and relief. Whiskey Papa Bravo. Is that you, Micah? Thank God. It's Chuck. We were about to lose hope. We thought everyone on the surface was gone. Do you have Gavin with you? Are you safe? Tears welled in my eyes. It's Micah. We're safe, Chuck. We're in the bunker. It worked. And no, Gavin is not here, but his nephew Thorne is. Thorne leaned into the mic, his eyes conveying a silent message of thanks. Chuck, this is Thorne. We're secure. We need a full status update on the world outside. What happened? The reply came back, stark and chilling. What happened, Thorne? The world is gone. You're among the last we've found. Welcome to the new timeline. The line crackled, then Chuck's voice softened, filled with unexpected determination. Now let's talk about how we rebuild. I looked at Thorne. We were alive. The fear was still there, but now it was overshadowed by a monumental, terrifying new task. The apocalypse was over. The survival was just beginning. We have survived the fire, but the world is gone, and the real fight for survival is just beginning. After a frantic cross-country dash and a narrow escape from the meteor's final impact, our group of 8 strangers is safe within the bunker, a massive, self-sustaining fortress built by Micah's father. The reckless, vital love forged between Micah and the soldier Thorne now faces the quiet challenge of confinement, while gentle hope blooms between Clara and the mechanic, Travis. With 3 years of supplies and a confirmed radio contact, the final credits have rolled on the old world, leaving us with a daunting, necessary task: to endure the long night and determine what future we will build for the new timeline.